So I'll start off talking a little bit about myself. I don't do PowerPoint. You'll have to be content with my magnetic personality rather than any PowerPoint. I joined the Foreign Office in 1979, straight from university. And it was a far more conventional organisation even than it is now. But I came from a very unconventional background. I was female, I was state educated, and I wasn't from Oxbridge. And the first thing I was told by my male contemporaries in the sixth form at school was I shouldn't bother. That they'd never take a woman, they'd never take a state-educated woman. I'm not going to Oxbridge, dear, because you're some kind of radical. So it would be better for you not to be disappointed, so don't try. And that's a theme that some of you may be familiar with. So I joined the Foreign Office, and legislation had come in about equal opportunities. It was percolating through. And after a year working in London, I was one of the first women to be offered the chance to learn a hard language. So I learnt Mandarin and went to China. So I spent my first posting in China, where a number of interesting things happened. It was the whole opening up to the outside world, 4 modernisations, and the negotiations on the future of Hong Kong. My career then became more unconventional when I foolishly married a colleague. And so we then started to juggle 2 careers round the world. My husband shares none of the same qualifications, background, talents to me. So trying to find 2 jobs together was pretty difficult. We then had 2 children, and the juggling became more complicated. So I went out at a time when it was pretty unconventional to have career breaks, go on secondment and go somewhere else. So I spent 3 years working for a Swiss bank in Zurich. I went on loan to the German Foreign Service as a German diplomat, working in Bonn as it was at the time. And I went on secondment to the Cabinet Office in London. And all of this was juggling because of the peculiar requirements of the international life and the 2 careers. I like the idea that's often presented to us that we have to tell people one memorable thing about ourselves. And this chose itself. I have been in some slightly unusual positions and met some slightly unusual people. But I'm the woman who used to talk to the Taliban in Islamabad. And I spoke to the Taliban about resolving the hijack of the Ariana plane to Stansted. So if you want your preconceptions shattered, the Taliban won't speak to a woman, and they certainly won't speak to a Western woman. Well, they spoke to this one. But at 50, I decided to leave the Foreign Office and reinvent myself. I'd had enough. You notice I'm being very frank about how old I am. This is the tone of the evening. So, one of the things I did, I became a non-executive director on the board of Mott MacDonald. For those of you who don't know Mott MacDonald, it's an employee-owned company, a consultancy, primarily in engineering, but also in energy, transportation, health, education. It has about £1 billion turnover and 14,000 staff worldwide. I've also been a school governor at an East End primary school, and again, shattering misperceptions. This primary school in the East End of London is one of the most successful schools in England and Wales, and our children get the top results, top 2% of results in the country. I'm also a trustee at Ampleforth, which is a Roman Catholic boarding school in the north of Yorkshire. I'm a visiting speaker on some postgraduate courses. I've been advising a small charity about China. So I've done a number of interesting things since 50. I want to talk a little bit about supporting other women and supporting younger women and doing what I can to encourage women to stick with it and not to give up. I greatly dislike some of the very glossy, very finished, very polished stories that younger women are presented with. I'm pretty certain that a lot of the disappointments, the setbacks, the compromises have all been edited out to give you a really shiny, really glossy, really beautifully successful story. And this is just intimidating. This just suggests that you've got to be Superwoman rather than a real person. I'm also very suspicious of anyone who promises to give you the top 3, 5 or 10 tips to get instant promotion or a seat on the board. I don't think it's like that. And again, that's setting up an impossible expectation and an impossible barrier for women to jump over. I'm also very happy to talk about my mistakes. I made a significant number, particularly if they're going to help other people go down the same cul-de-sacs and waste their time and energy. I think it's also important to say that it's up to you what you think success is and what your fulfillment is going to be. Again, too often we're told this is what success looks like, this is how success is measured. But if it's not right for you and it's not what's going to make you feel successful and fulfilled, then it's not worth going for. Looking at the positive, I've had a lot of support and encouragement from some very unexpected places. And one of the lessons I draw from that is don't make assumptions about who can help you and who's willing to help you. So obviously my parents were extremely supportive. They had 4 daughters, so the idea that the education was for the boys and the girls would find a nice husband wasn't going to work. My mother had always worked. My mother was a pretty determined woman, but to show how far we've come, and something we tend to forget, my mother had to leave school at 14. There was no education for a girl in her position at 14. So her formal education finished at 14. So if you're feeling a bit low in spirits, cling to that thought, it's not that long ago. I got a lot of support from my University Careers Service. They get a bad press, but they told me that they thought I was capable of getting into the fast stream of the Foreign Office and to go for it. When I worked at Credit Suisse in Zurich, I was working at the time in an even more conservative environment than you'd find now. So I was hired by a man who took a female foreigner with a small child with no banking background to lead a team. And he knew I was only in the country for a finite period of time. And it was only afterwards that I discovered quite how brave he'd been, because this went against everything that was in the bank's hiring policy at the time. I then had my second child, and he made it possible in this very conservative environment for me to return, carry on working as a mother of 2. The other surprising people, for some of you who've been very encouraging, are the abbot and the monastic community in Ampleforth. The Board of Trustees at Ampleforth is a genuinely diverse group of people, female, male, Catholic, non-Catholic, and they have managed to create an extremely diverse board of all the talents. Yet the image is, a monastery in the north of Yorkshire isn't going to be the most outgoing place. Well, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised the organisations that are up for change and the ones who aren't. So just check the assumptions from time to time. I wanted to share with you some of the absolutely extraordinary things I've been told during my working life, because I think we do need to retain a sense of humour. But I think we also need to remind ourselves why there's still a fair amount of work to be done and why the battle isn't over. So, as I say, I was a non-executive director for 4 years, went to a number of non-executive director events. So people on boards, shareholder return, that kind of stuff. And I went to one event, and a group of female NEDs asked the chairman why there were no women on his board. And he said, well, it's really very difficult. It's very difficult because, most women don't have a scientific or professional background. And so they really wouldn't fit on a board. I suppose I can think of some exceptions, he said. Retail would be good, because in most families, it's the women who do the shopping. So I could see a woman on the board of a retail organisation. This is in the last 5 years, before we get excited. But my absolute favourite, I was at a sort of networking NED dinner, and I'm sitting next to this chap, and we'd gone around the table, introduced ourselves, said, Mark MacDonald, engineering, stuff, blah, blah, blah. And we had a Q&A after the dinner, and he said, well, of course, it's absolutely impossible for a woman to be on the board of an engineering company. Am I so dull that he didn't hear what I said, or he switched off, or is he just assuming? And he said, women don't understand engineering. And to be on the board of an engineering company, you've got to be an engineer. And so therefore you really, really can't have women on the board of engineering companies. It's just not possible. Now, where do you start? I mean, Anna Ford famously poured a glass of red wine over a man who insulted her. I'm really sorry I didn't, but there is still some way to go. And for those of you who think the battle's been won, let me tell you it hasn't. And just because you're older and more senior, and I've admitted to being well over 50, people still come out with some pretty damning and pretty unfortunate things. Some other assumptions that I think need knocking on the head, and which I think are very important for younger people setting out. I didn't discover until it was too late that other people were making assumptions for me about what I wanted from my career. Because I wasn't speaking up loudly enough, they were assuming that my husband's career would take priority because he was the man. They were assuming that because I had children, my children were more important than my job. The other things that I was being told were things like, well, I don't know why women are still complaining. We've offered you part-time working. You can carry on having a job. Isn't that enough? But you know, if you work part-time, you can't really expect to have a career. You could have a job, but you're not showing commitment, are you? I mean, to show commitment, you've got to be here full-time. The clients won't like it if you're not constantly available. And if you take up the offer of a career break, which is on our website and which we're so proud of, well, you can't really expect us to think you've got the same aspirations as anybody else because you went out, you went away. You can't come back and expect the same treatment as people who've stuck with it all the way through. So you certainly can't expect promotion because you're not showing commitment, are you? You're either working part-time or you've taken a career break. So we're not going to give you the really serious projects because you're not really committed. And we can't promote you because you're not really committed. So there is still enough nonsense out there to convince me that we have some way to go. And I am still convinced that if a man tried to do the same thing, he'd probably get a similar story. So I think that some of the men who've tried to be a bit more adventurous, a bit more family friendly, have also had a not particularly easy time. So one of the areas that I'm very much signed up to, which Sarah and I have been talking about, is having conversations with younger women about some of the questions they have to grapple with at work, some of the problems they face, and to reduce that sense of, am I inventing this for the first time? This feels like me by myself. There must be other people who've been through something similar. And still, in a number of organisations, there are either no women at the top, none whatsoever, none on the board, none at senior levels, or there are very few of them. Or you may find that younger women are reluctant to speak to them because of that sharp, glossy, shiny I was speaking about. These women seem so impossibly successful and they can't have any weaknesses at all. So how would they talk to me about my problems? And one of the things you discover is that to survive in these very, very tough organisations, a lot of women have had to suppress any sign of weakness, any sign of self-doubt whatsoever, because they were frightened of being chucked out as being not up to the job. So I still think there is a real need to create a group of women for whom younger, aspiring women can turn and can have conversations about what it's really like to keep going. And I'll finish with the things I wish I'd known at the time. I'm going to share with you something extremely important for anybody who has children. One day, your baby won't wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. One day, your baby will sleep through the night. And one day, you'll have difficulty getting your children out of bed. You can define how people see you by how you speak about yourself. And if you don't define yourself, someone else will do it for you. And they won't necessarily do it in complimentary terms, and they won't necessarily do it in accurate terms. And it took me a long time to find that out, and I wasted a lot of time not articulating what I wanted. Keep acquiring qualifications and skills. Keep going. However tough it is, keep going. Keep going. It'll maintain your interest, but it'll also make you a more interesting and marketable person. Never be too busy to meet some new people or to go to an event, whether it's a seminar or a conference you're really interested in. It's easy to be tired. It's easier to think you've got to go home and do something valuable around the home, like the ironing or the dusting. Go to the conference, go to the seminar. Your children will never remember whether the mantelpiece was dusty. And finally, don't be afraid to ask for help as necessary, but choose wisely. Choose the people you're going to ask for help. There are some very sharp-toothed predators out there who would love to tell everybody that you can't cope and that's why you're asking for help. So choose wisely, but get support. And good luck. Thank you very much.